Our guest today is Ambassador John Bolton. We are honored to have him on the Enemies List podcast today. We've got a tight 15 minutes with the ambassador, so I want to get right into it, sir. Um, I want to ask you about the transformation of the Republican Party that you and I grew up in into something that has now become pro-Putin and sort of pro-authoritarian in a lot of ways. What do you see as the future of that party as a part of America's foreign policy and diplomatic and military strength in the world?
Well, I hope that party that you described doesn't have much of a future. And I believe, notwithstanding what the commentariat says, I believe Trump is an aberrational figure in American politics. Yes. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have a philosophy himself. He doesn't think in policy terms. He thinks only about what benefits Donald Trump. And I therefore think when he finally leaves the political scene, he will leave no heir apparent. He will not leave any coherent basis on which to proceed. There'll be people who emulate his theatrical attributes, of which there are a number. But I think a lot of people in Congress who sound like Trumpers are intimidated by him. It's not that they agree with him. They're intimidated. That's good news and bad news, but
right.
It's better that they don't agree with him. And I just think the rest of us have to keep up pushing for Reaganite policies. They were right in 1980. Obviously, we're a long way away from that, but the philosophy behind the policies is what should guide us in the future. And I think we can get back to that. It won't be easy given the duration of Trump's appeal, which has been surprising in American political terms, but it doesn't mean things are changed forever.
I think that's right. I think that he is so bespoke. He's so uniquely, a cultural presence that it's hard to imitate him in the future as a leader, which is good, especially because, I both come from the right side of the fence, but, there was a great historical tradition in the U.S. from Truman forward that we took the Russians with a big grain of salt. We tried to make sure that we addressed this, that very pro-Putin sort of the pinnacle of it being Helsinki and now the sort of Republican flip on Ukraine. What do you see as the future right now of Ukraine in the course of this giant debate we're having in Washington over funding the additional military aid they need to keep up the fight against Putin?
I'm very worried about Ukraine. I think it's in a perilous position. I think the Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin demonstrates Putin is now doing something I was afraid of for the past year. He's now basically saying he's prepared to negotiate. I think he needs a ceasefire to regroup. Mm-hmm. He will basically double Russian control over Ukrainian territory, although at a terrible human cost from Russia's point of view. But if Putin can buy time, he'll be back at it. I think Biden will jump at the chance to negotiate a ceasefire in Ukraine to take one major problem off the table in front of him. I'm very much afraid the Europeans would just like to turn the page on the whole thing. Mm-hmm. The looming possibility of a Trump presidency has to worry Zelensky and his government.
Sure.
So with our inability to get legislative approval of necessary assistance for Ukraine, Putin has moved into a prime position, and I think Trump will exacerbate it with his comments. So it really requires people to speak up for the reasons why we aid Ukraine. This isn't charity for the Ukrainians. We're doing this because it's in our interest to do it. And I won't spell out all the arguments here, but this is the fundamental problem with explaining to the isolationists, both in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party, that our way of life here at home depends on a strong position internationally. And when we show weakness in Ukraine, it's not just to the Russians, it's to the Chinese, it's to Iran, it's to North Korea, it's to our allies as well who worry about our staying power.
I think that's definitely one of the things that our NATO allies have to be thinking about too, is, they saw sort of a breath of fresh air. When Donald Trump went in, it was basically this transactional, like, pay me attitude towards NATO, which ignored 65 plus years of history before that of, yes, did all the European countries pay as much as we wanted? No, of course not. But was NATO an essential to the global security order? Absolutely. What do you think happens to NATO if, we get Trump back in office and my belief is he'll just cede Ukraine to Putin immediately. He'll just cut him off. But what's your thought on how how that security architecture looks if we don't help Ukraine and Trump comes back.
Well, I think Trump will almost certainly try to withdraw from NATO. He almost did it in 2018. He's not changed his view. His comments are a little bit opaque at the moment, but I think I know what his intention would be. Mm-hmm. When Trump pressed NATO allies to spend more, it wasn't the same reason that many of us for many, many years have pressed him to spend more to make NATO stronger. It was to push NATO into a position where he could announce withdrawal. And I think that's still his motivation. I think Putin is just waiting for him to come back to do that. And I think withdrawal would be a catastrophic mistake for the United States. It would obviously have immediate negative implications for Ukraine. But I think that's what Trump has said is he would get Zelensky and Putin in a room together and solve it in 24 hours, which of course is ridiculous. A meeting like that would fail. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's not Donald Trump's fault. It never is when failure happens. It has to be somebody else. And I don't think he would blame his friend Vladimir Putin. So that's just another reason that underlines why we need to get this pending aid to Ukraine so they can stave off the kinds of pressure I'm afraid they're about to see. Mm-hmm.